on the different focusing on the different mechanisms and principles that you should implement in an organization or rather in your systems to be able to say that you've implemented security. So basically, when you talk about information security is literally everything, every practice, be it tools, procedures, policies, that are aimed at protecting information that is from unauthorized access. It could be also you're protecting it from unauthorized modification, destruction. So basically, information security is literally everything that focuses on something known as the CIA triad. So the CIA triad is just, okay. So we're going to cover a few elements, or rather a few areas in information security. So it's a wide topic that has different areas of focus. So we're going to cover the different areas and the different aspects that are involved in the whole process of information security. So we have a few of them: application security, access control, GRC, governance, risk and management, network security, physical security, operations, as well as incident response. So we'll cover a few more that this is just like a highlight to show you what information security entails. So, like I said, information security majorly focuses on three main things. So you want to ensure that the principles, the mechanisms, all those tools, procedures you're implementing, they're focusing or rather centered around the CIA triad. So the CIA triad is basically confidentiality, integrity, as well as availability. So these are different principles that govern the efficiency of your security mechanisms. You cannot you cannot have one and lack the other and claim that you have efficient security. So if I am to just explain the different principles in detail, so when we talk about confidentiality, this is where you ensure that the mechanisms that you're putting in place, be it tools, technologies, and all that, they ensure that information is accessible only by the authorized personnel. That people who are not authorized to access that information, they're not accessing it. And there are different techniques that you can use to address confidentiality. So we have encryption, authentication, access control, just to mention but a few. So when you talk about encryption, it's a technique, it's a cryptography technique that basically converts data from plain text to ciphertext. So ciphertext is basically an unreadable format of data, where if anyone who's unauthorized gains access to that data, as long as it's converted to an unreadable format, the ciphertext format, they'll not be able to make sense out of that information. So the whole concept around encryption, you're converting readable data to an unreadable data. So we'll get to see how that works. I'll just show you like a small demo on that. Then, of course, when you're doing this encryption, you're using different algorithms. So we have different types of encryptions. We have the symmetric encryption, and you also have the asymmetric encryption. So I think that's something I've covered in later in the slides, so I'll address that as well. So of course, when you perform in encryption, the different algorithms or other operations that are used to achieve this conversion of plain text to ciphertext. So some of these algorithms, we have RSA, ES, AES, DS, and all that. So the other we have is access control. So when we talk about access control, this is basically where you're limiting or rather you're restricting access to resources, assets, parts of the system. It could either be based on, the restriction could either be based on roles that people have in your organization or other attributes. For example, you could have limited access. For example, you assuming you're in an organization that uses Active Directory. Active Directory is like a centralized way of managing users in your organization. So you can limit access to your network. Probably, the working time for your organization is 8 to 5. So you limit access, you control access to your network to be in between those times, such that people cannot access they cannot maybe access Active Directory when it's past probably 6 p.m. So you're protecting your assets. So when you're controlling this access, you restrict you're restricting access based on, so you can use the roles based on what is the role this person plays in the organization. Then the other mechanism you can use is based on different attributes. We've talked about one attribute, that is the time of the day. You can limit access to maybe during the day, and then at night people are not allowed to access specific resources or other assets in your organization. And also another attribute you could use is maybe department, which department does a specific user belong to? So if they belong to a specific, let's say, for example, the IT department, you want to give them access to specific resources that probably the finance department doesn't need access to. Then, so that is based on different attributes. Of course, there are other attributes that you can used to control access, maybe in terms of resource types. What is the resource that you're granting or rather controlling access on? And then finally, the other option that you can use to address confidentiality we have is the authentication. This is basically why you verifying users' identity. You're verifying who they actually are. So these can be achieved by use of credentials, that is usernames, passwords. If people are logging into your system, they have to, of course, provide usernames, valid usernames and passwords. And you can also implement something known as multi-factor authentication. This is where you have an added layer of authentication. So probably you send like OTPs. So every time someone logs in, they have to also go ahead and provide an OTP for them to be granted access. So these are some of the different techniques that can be used to address confidentiality. So the other principle we have is integrity. So when we talk about integrity, this is a principle that ensures that information is accurate and it's not modified or tampered with. That is by the unauthorized personnel. You ensure that the changes that are made to informations, to systems, they are authorized, they are made by the authorized personnel. And of course, just like confidentiality, there are different techniques that you can implement that can help you address this principle. We have, just to mention but a few, we have hashing, data validation, audit trail. So when you talk about hashing, it's also a cryptographic operation. So you've talked about the encryption as an example of cryptography operation. So hashing is also a cryptography operation. So basically what happens with hashing, so on the encryption part, you basically taken the plain text data and you're converting it to ciphertext. So when it comes to hashing, this is now where you take the content that is inside. For example, you have a file that you want to generate a hash value. So you basically take the content that is inside that file and then use that content to generate a code or rather a string that is known as a hash value. So the content is not changed. What is generated is the hash value. So I'll get to show you the difference between those two, the hashing and the encryption, and how it works. So of course, again, hashing uses its own algorithms. We have the MD5, SHA-256, SHA-1, and they all differ in terms of security, performance, and also reliability. Then you also have data validation as a way of addressing integrity of data or rather integrity of systems. and information. So when you talk about data validation, this is basically where you're verifying the accuracy of, or rather the consistency of that data. This can be used with, this is something you can do using the hash values. Because if you have like an original file and then let's say you generate a hash value from that original file, then it gets changed at some point, it gets modified. When now a hash value is generated on the new file, the values are going to be different because now the content has been altered. So with these hash values, you can be able to compare, do I have consistency in the hash values? So if you find a difference, you're able to know that there's been an alteration of the data that is inside probably a file. Then, of course, we have audit trail. This is basically where there is recording of activities or other events within a system. So with this record of activities, you're able to track and also get to see some of the changes or other modification that has been made on specific data. So this helps with ensuring that information has not been altered by unauthorized personnel. Then finally, the other principle for the CI triad we have is availability. This is basically a principle that ensures that information is accessible and usable when needed. So when it's required by the rest personnel, information should be available and usable. So we have a few techniques that we can use. We have redundancy, we have backups, integrating failover mechanisms. So when you talk about redundancy, this is where you have like multiple copies of data, such that if you lose the original, if you lose the original piece of data, you can always use the copies to have the information available at all times. This could be maybe in terms of how you store that information. When you're storing data, store it in multiple locations. That's in case, let's say, you lose data from one location, you can always retrieve it on the other from the other location. The same case with backups. This is basically where you're creating copies of the original data. So in case something happens on the original data, you can always retrieve it. And also the failover mechanisms, they all trail back to creating backups. This where if original information is lost, you have a way of automatically switching to maybe probably the backup information, or rather, if your system is down, you have a way of automatically switching to maybe probably a backup system and things like that. So those are the three different principles of the CIA triad that should ensure that you are addressing in your organization. So, and you cannot have one and lack the other. So if you have confidentiality, if you say you have confidentiality and you lack integrity, then it means that when you don't have integrity, your information is being tampered with by the unauthorized personnel. So the three of them, they're equally important. So you want to address all the three aspects for you to be in a position where you can say that you have a good security posture for your organization. So the next thing we're going to look at is cryptography. So like I've said, cryptography is basically mathematical operations that you can perform on data to protect it from vulnerabilities associated, or rather threats associated with the CIA. So you're basically performing different operations to address the CIA. So when it comes to cryptography, we have different techniques. We have encryption, and we also have hashing. So I've talked about encryption. This is where you're converting data from plain text to ciphertext, where using different algorithms and secret keys. So when you're encrypting data, you encrypt it using a key. And also when you're decrypting data, decrypting now is the conversion of ciphertext to plain text. And now when you're decrypting it, you also use a key to decrypt it. So we have two different types of encryptions. We have the first one we have is asymmetric encryption. So let me talk about symmetric encryption first. So when you have the symmetric encryption, this is where the key that is used for encrypting the data is the same key that is used for decrypting the data. So you have one common key used for both encryption and decryption. Then when it comes to the asymmetric encryption, this is where you have like a pair of keys, related keys. That is the public key and the private key. So normally the public key is the one that is used for encryption and the private key is used for decryption. And of course, there are different algorithms used for these two different encryptions. So you can see examples for the asymmetric. We have the RSA, and then for the symmetric, we have the AES encryption algorithm. Then now when it comes to the hashing, like I said, it's just where you take the input or rather a message, and then using that message, you generate a string, a fixed string of data that is known as a hash value. So with this hash generation of hash values, you can be able to verify the integrity of data at different points. So if the hash values differ, then it means that the content of a specific file has been altered with. So, and of course, we have different mechanisms that are used. We have the SHA-1, SHA-256, MD5. Like I said, they differ in terms of security, performance, and also reliability. So I'm just going to do a simple demo on that. So I'll start off with hashing. So I hope you can see my terminal. I don't know if I'm sharing my entire screen.
Yes, we can see your terminal.
Okay. So I'm just going to create a folder where we can work in. I'll just call this hashing, and I'll navigate to that folder. So as you can see, it's an empty folder. It doesn't have anything. So I'm just going to create a file here. So I can call this file, let me just call it test. So now you can see I have a file test. So if I am to view the content of this file, it's currently empty. So it doesn't have any content inside it, excuse me. So it doesn't have any content inside it. So if I do cut the test, which is our file name, you can see it's empty. So I'm just going to add a random content inside that file so that you can see. So I'm just going to edit this and say echo. You can see now we have content inside this file. So the file test has content, and the content it has is random content. So I'm just going to generate a hash value for this. So of course, like I said, you can use different algorithms. You can use MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256. Yeah, and they all differ in terms of, so I'm just going to show all of them. So I just need to do MD5 sum, then the file name, which is test. So you can see what it does. It generates a value, a fixed string value. This is what it generates. But then again, if I try to view the contents of one test file, I'm still able to see the original data. So it doesn't alter with the original data. So what it does, it uses that original data to generate a hash value. So of course, I can use the other algorithms. I can also do SHA-1 sum and then test. Let me just clear this and run the MD5 so that you get to see the different algorithms are going to give us different hash values. So we have SHA-1 sum and then test. hit enter, and you can see the value you've gotten here from MD5 is different from the one you've gotten here for SHA-1. Then I can also do SHA-256, and then the file. You can see it gives us a different output. And if you look at the length, if you compare the length of the MD5, the SHA-1, and also the SHA-256, they differ in terms of length. So the SHA-256 is giving us a longer hash value. So what happens? So these are the values we're getting. So what happens if we come here and we decide to alter the content of the test file? So if I say cat test, so you can see currently it has the words random and also content. So if I decide to edit this and say, I want to alter the content, say, this is a webinar on, into that. So I'm going to set this. So you notice the value we were getting initially when you had not altered the content of the test file. So I've altered it. So now if I do cat, I try to view the contents of that file. So you can see the content has changed. Initially it was random content, but now this is a webinar on security fundamentals. So say I generate a hash value again on that file. You can see it gives me a different output from what we initially had. So the moment you get this difference in hash values, you know that the content has been altered with. So this helps with in terms of validation or rather verification of data validation. So you can get to check your new hash value against the original hash value. Then assuming, I hope you're together on that. So I have this file test. So if I do cat test, let me create another file with a different name, but with the same content. So it's basically I'm going to create touch. So I have two files. So I've just copied the content of test to test2. So I have two files, test and test2. So if I do cat test, hit enter, and I also do cat test2, you can see they have the same content. So if I generate a hash value for the first file, and I generate another hash value for the second file, you can see we're getting the same value, the same hash value. So as long as the content is the same, it doesn't matter whether the file names are different, as long as the content is the same, because the content is what is helping us to get the hash value. So as long as the content is the same, it doesn't matter whether the name is different, has been altered with, the content is what matters with the hashing. So I hope we're okay on the hashing part. So I'm just going to move to now the encryption part. You notice how for the hashing, you're still able to see the original content. It's not altered. So you're using the original content to generate a value. So I'm going to create another folder here. And this one, I'll call it encryption. Let me navigate to that. So I'm in my new folder, encryption. Say wireless. It's currently empty as well. So I'm just going to, so for this demo, for the encryption demo, I'll be using a command line tool known as OpenSSL. So I'm going to create a file here and call it test. Then of course, put content inside it. Going to say, put the word hi. You can see the file has the word hi in it. So let's say we want to encrypt the file. So we're using a command line tool known as OpenSSL. So it helps with encryption. And of course, you can use different encryption algorithms. So, like I said, we have different encryption algorithms. We have RSA, AES, DES. So for this demo, I'll just use the AES because I want to do the symmetric encryption that uses the same key for encryption and the same key for decryption. So I'll come here and say OpenSSL. Then ENC. So OpenSSL, when you type OpenSSL, this OpenSSL ENC, it basically invokes that encryption algorithm, or rather that encryption, it specifies that now we want to encrypt. So you say OpenSSL encrypt, and of course you can run a help against OpenSSL, and you get to see the different commands you can use with OpenSSL. So I want to use the AES encryption algorithm. So I'll just say OpenSSL ENC. Then to specify the algorithm I want to use for encrypting, so I just use hyphen AES. So I want to use the AES 256 block. And again, when you run the help against the OpenSSL, you can get to see the different algorithms you have. So you can see we have AES 128, 256, and all that. So I want to use the AES 256 CBC. So you specify AES 256 CBC. Then, of course, you need to specify which file are we encrypting. So the file we're encrypting is the file known as test. So to specify the file we're encrypting, you use hyphen in, then it's known as test, you give the name. Then, of course, you use the out to specify now the new name of the encrypted file. So probably we can call it test.enc. So basically what is happening in this case, we're using OpenSSL to encrypt, and the algorithm we're using is the AES 256 block. And then the file that is giving us the input is the test file. And then once it has been encrypted, a new file should be created that is known as test.enc. So now test.enc is going to be the encrypted format of test. So now when I hit enter, you asked for a password. So this is the password you're going to use for encryption and also decryption because we're doing symmetric. So we're using the same key for encryption and decryption. So just put a simple password. And you notice here it gives us a warning, just tells us it's not that secure. The type of encryption you've done is not that secure. And it gives us like options that can help us to make it a bit more complex. Because when you're performing encryption, it's you use algorithms, and these algorithms use different operations. So yeah. So we've basically done a simple encryption. So now wireless, you can see the test.enc has been created, which is now the encrypted format of the test file. So if I am to view the content of the test file, you can see it still has its original data. But if I view the content of the encrypted file, which is test.enc, you can see it's in some random format that doesn't make sense. Are we together? So what happens with the encryption, it basically converts the data. It's taking the data and converting it to an unreadable format. And as you can see, this is unreadable. Again, if you want now to decrypt, you can use OpenSSL again. So OpenSSL, ENC, then of course, the algorithm is AEC 256 CBC. Then we are decrypting, so -D. So what are we decrypting? The file we're decrypting is this one, test.enc. So we decrypt it and we call it, so now to specify the input, we say -in, because we're getting the input now from the encrypted file. It's now reverse. The encrypted file is now the one that's giving us input for decryption. So in test.enc, and then you can out this to maybe a different file. Probably we call it test. We call it test2. And hit enter. Of course, you put in the password that you set. So now if we ls, you can see we have a file that has been created. So this is the file that has now the decrypted format of test.enc. So if we cut test2, sorry, you cut test2, test2, you can see it has the word hi, and if you cut test, which is the original file, it has the word hi. So they both have the same content. So that's basically the difference between hashing and encryption. So yeah, I hope we're clear on that. So moving on, I just want to now talk about the different areas, or rather some of the different technologies that you can use to address different aspects of information security. So I have a couple of them. So basically, we're going to start off with, so you have firewalls, intrusion detection and prevention systems. We have access controls, and we also have SIM and other ones. So I'll just start off with the firewalls. So firewalls are basically network security devices that are aimed at filtering, or rather monitoring the traffic that is coming in and going out from a network. So when they filter and monitor this traffic, they're able to determine, should we allow this activity to happen? Should we deny this activity from happening? So in some cases, you find when you in an organization and you're using a company device, you try to access sites like, it could be like Netflix or other WhatsApp, and then you like told you cannot access this, kindly check your firewall configurations. So in some cases you find you can limit, you limited, users in our organizations are limited from accessing specific resources by the use of firewalls. So basically a firewall works out, operates as a barrier between your internal network and the external network. So we have different types of firewalls. For example, the Windows operating system comes with a pre-installed firewall that in itself provides a good security posture for the Windows operating system. And also you can have a firewall that addresses the traffic for an entire network, for multiple devices in a network. Then when we talk about intrusion detection and prevention systems, So these are basically solutions or other systems. Their work is to monitor the traffic. The traffic in this case is the requests being sent from a network to another network and all that. Be it emails, be it you requesting a resource, you accessing websites. So what IDS and IPSs do, they basically monitor the network traffic for any suspicious activities. If they notice like an activity that doesn't normally happen, they raise that event as an alert, and then the security analyst, or rather probably the SOC analyst, now follows up on analyzing the analyzing the event and establishing whether it's an actual incident or rather just a false alarm. So the difference between the IDS and the IDS basically will just raise the alert, detect an abnormality in a system, and then raise an alert. When it comes to the IPS, it detects and also remediates. It's it's remediates to the just a fast response to the incident, probably maybe like blocking you out of a system and things like that. Then we have access control. So when we talk about access control, these are basically mechanisms that have been put up to control the access to different resources, assets, or other parts of the system, as well as data. So access controls, they can be categorized in different types. So we have preventive access controls, we have detective access controls, and you also have corrective controls. So when we talk about preventive control, these are measures put up to prevent incidents from happening in the first place. For example, a firewall. So a firewall is there to prevent, to ensure that traffic that is not supposed to be traffic that is not supposed to be moving in and out of your network is not being allowed. So it prevents an incident from happening. So other examples, we have the IPS, policies and procedures that you can put up. You can establish policies for maybe how people use, you can have policies that guide in terms of when someone is bringing their own device to work, what are some of the expectations they're supposed to have addressed when they're using their device to access the company network. Then we have the detective controls. When we talk about the detective controls, their work is to basically detect. They're there to monitor the traffic, detect, and raise alerts. So they identify incidents and they raise alerts so that they can be further investigated. And examples of these corrective controls, we have the SIM, this one, or rather people call it CM, but whichever way you choose to pronounce it, it does the job. So when talk about SIM is solution that basically monitors the traffic. It gets traffic from different sources. So SIM stands for Security Information and Event Management. It's a very, very useful tool, especially for the SOC analyst, because they can use it to centrally get logs from different sources. It could be logs from devices, from firewalls. Uh, so when you get these logs or other records of activities, you can get to the SIM analyzes these logs to ease the work of the security analyst and raise alerts. So, and then now from these alerts, the security analyst will now further get to investigate and identify if an incident is an actual incident or rather just a false alarm. Then you have corrective controls. Corrective controls, they're basically now their work is to control and now eliminate the impact of a security incident. This is when now an incident has already happened, our system was impacted. How are we
Question. Um, are you supposed to be on the next slide?
no, I'm just expounding on
Okay.
yeah. But I also have it here, but in like general, just expounding on, yeah. So I've just talked about the controls that we have: preventive, detective, and also corrective. So preventive, they basically prevent an incident from occurring in the first place. And then detective, they basically detect, identify incidents and raise alerts. Then when we talk about corrective, there are controls that are put up to mitigate and eliminate the impacts of a security incident once it has already been detected. So, and some of these controls, the corrective controls, we have incident response controls, backup and restoration. So in case you lose your original data, you can correct that by restoring your backup data. Uh, so going back to this, so we've talked about these four and what they do. Then we also have another mechanism, the IAM, or rather the Identity and Access Management. So this is basically a mechanism that allows management of users. So it identifies users and also addresses the access privileges they should have on a system in an organization and things like that. So when it comes to identity and access management, there are two main things that you want to address. So first things first is authentication. How are you authenticating your users? This is where you're verifying that users are who they say they are. This could be in terms of maybe them providing credentials. It could be usernames, passwords, and things like that. Then, of course, there also has to be the concept of authorization. Once someone has verified they are who they say they are, what level of access are we supposed to grant them? What resources, what actions can they perform on our system? Then, incident response, this is basically a mechanism that focuses on identification, analysis, and recovery of a system, or rather recovery of a system from an incident that has occurred. So if let's say your organization has been compromised, what is the process that you're going to use to address that attack, and how are you going to retrieve back to normal operations? So of course, we have different phases that are there in the incident response. um, so we have the preparation phase. This is basically where you prepare yourself in case of anything. How are we going to address different issues? What is the team that's going to be responsible for this? In case this happens, how do we address this? Then, of course, after preparation, now there comes in the identification. How are incidents identified? So for this, you use different techniques. So you can use log analysis. We have different solutions that can help with identification of incidents. We have the SIEM solutions, EDRs, XDRs, the source, the SOAR, or rather the SOAR, however you choose to pronounce it. So all these solutions, they help with identification of incidents. So once an incident has been identified, of course, it has to be analyzed and narrowed down to, you get to understand what is the scope of a specific incident and how did it actually happen? What are the different techniques that were used? So you get to analyze that. Then when it comes to containment, then after analysis, you need to contain that part of the affected system. So if let's say it's a compromised device, you need to contain it, separate it from the rest of the network, so that the attack doesn't spread. So the main point of containment, you controlling spread of an attack, or rather the negative impact caused on your system by an incident. Then after containment, of course, you need to eradicate that. You need to identify the root cause and also ensure that you've eliminated it. Then after elimination, restore now your contained part of the system, restore it back to normal operation. And of course, post-incident activity, things like documentation of the whole incident, how it was addressed, and things like that. Then finally, we have risk management. So when we talk about risk management, this is basically a mechanism that aims to identify and analyze some of the possible risks in an organization. So when talk about risks, so maybe before I talk about what a risk is, I want to address a few things there. Talk about what an asset is. So an asset is literally anything in an organization that requires protection of data from unauthorized personnel. Then we have threat. So a threat is a potential or rather an actual event that can exploit a weakness in a system. Then a vulnerability is now the weakness in a system. So probably you can have an example of a weakness. You can have maybe you have like a system that has a login window and someone can put in the wrong credentials and still be able to log in. They can put in a username that doesn't exist on your system and still be able to log in. That's a weakness. So that's a vulnerability on your system. Then a threat is basically anything or any event that can exploit that weakness. So that's the threat. And then now, when the threat acts upon the vulnerability, now you get the risk. So the risk is the potential damage that can occur when a threat exploits a vulnerability. So you want to understand these things. You want to analyze your network and get to see some of the potential risks that can happen in your organization, get to see what is the risk appetite of your company. And once you've identified these potential risks, you're able to get a baseline on where you should start in terms of addressing, where you should focus more, which areas of your system should you focus more in terms of addressing security. Yeah. So majorly, so those are basically some of the concepts that you can have, or rather some of the areas you can focus on to address security architecture, or rather the posture of your organization, some of the technologies, tools you can bring in. And of course, this also involves the people because, for example, for incident response, you need people who have a good understanding on how do we analyze events, how do we analyze alerts, how do we establish that an alert is an actual incident, how do we now respond? So you also need the people. So all these mechanisms, they all address the whole concept of the security, information security, design and architecture. So I think with that, I have come to the end of my presentation, and now I can take questions in case anyone has questions.
If you have a question, you can either put it in the chat or just unmute yourself. Thank you so much, Christine Muturi, for that informative session on information security fundamentals. I love the part about difference between hashing and encryption. That was practical. Thank you so much for that. And maybe just feedback that I got from one of the groups when I shared your poster. Someone mentioned that you're a really good speaker, and I said that I'm going to pass it over to you during the
Oh,
session.
okay. Thank you to them, whoever they are. Um, Probably we've encountered during my training sessions or something.
We have a question in the chat. What are some good IAM tools that you have worked with? IAM tools.
So someone asked some of the good IAM tools that are, excuse me, I need to sip some water. Just a minute. I think I've talked too much and my voice.
It's okay, we can wait. It happens sometimes. You've spoken for an hour without a break, so
Just to address that question on the IAM. So of course we have different IAM tools that are there, and of course they address they address different solutions. So of course, an example we have is the Google Cloud IAM. I don't know if some of you have interacted with the Google. They provide a free certification that you can use to learn. So just it's very, very good and resourceful. And also these tools, we also have the IBM. So all these tools, we have Microsoft Azure. These tools, they differ in terms of what they offer. So you also want to look at things that you want to look at what do you want to address and also what is your budget. Because then again, you will go for an expensive IAM tool that is maybe too expensive or rather way out of your budget. So I have interacted with the Google Cloud IAM, so which is a good one, and it has some good level of access management. Yeah.
I hope that answers your question, Denson. Anybody else with a question? Feel free to unmute yourself. We have input from Jemima who says Manage Engine has one